Hi, everybody, and thank you, Sophie, for that very warm welcome. I'm always delighted to be working with a Slack group as I warm enormously to their commitment towards supporting families and parents and children within their educational and residential care. So thank you, everybody, for linking in, and I hope that our time together will be useful. I'm not a psychologist and I'm not a behaviour specialist, but I do tick the personal, professional and lived boxes, and I'll be sharing with you my sort of perspectives as a practitioner, an educator and an advocate, and be drawing from the experiences of the many thousands of families that I've had the privilege of journeying with over the past 30 years. And I think often we're trying to consider how we can reframe managing, supporting, exploring, understanding behaviour, and often we shy away from describing it as challenging. And I don't necessarily warm to that, but it's something that we all do realistically understand. And we all experience challenging behaviour. I was just sharing with Sophie earlier that one of my challenges remains to be time management. I'm still the woman that's brushing my teeth and the toilet at the same time. So trying to manage time is one of my challenges, and certainly I think my time management behaviour certainly challenges most of the people that I encounter. So reframing challenging behaviour into comfortable for all behaviour, behaviour that offers more of an equilibrium. But the reality is there's no DIY project when it comes to working on and supporting behaviour. And it's a huge topic and a huge subject, which is why one of the reasons with the Slack group and I agreed that actually we can't possibly look at all these aspects in one session. So we've kind of snipped up this session into 3 particular focus areas. And we took those titles and those focus areas from your own feedback, from the things that you've been telling us you'd like us to have a closer look at. So it's not a case of finding this is the right tool for the job. Let's see how we can fix it. And I know sometimes that feels a bit disappointing, but let's explore some of the reasons why and see if we can sort of manage our expectations together and work on deeper understanding. So we're going to start by thinking about our behaviour journeys. And I'm just playing this little video, and there's no volume really other than sounds of the sea. So if you don't get that volume, don't worry about it, because sounds of the sea are hopefully something that we can all bring to mind. But if you look very carefully at this little video, you can see there's some movement in the sunset. And it's a little boy who's just got complete abandonment. He's just absorbed in his own joy and his own world. So let's start by thinking of our behaviour journeys. Many behaviour journeys that I've travelled through have taught me that all behaviour is subjective. It's about how we perhaps describe it. Is it influenced by our social, cultural, maybe our religious beliefs, maybe our family expectations? And I think, when we see this little boy here in the sea with that beautiful, just abandonment and enjoyment of nature, at what point that child playing in that way, just do we decide, actually, it's okay to genuinely dance as if no one's watching? But at what point do we think, actually, this is inappropriate, embarrassing, or awkward? At what point do we think he should just come out of the sea when he's told? So I'm just going to move a little pause for a minute, because I want us to think about one of the words that perhaps, irrespective of our social and cultural and personal beliefs, I think this word is out there to describe lots of behaviour. And it's one that I get into trouble with still. I was away with friends this weekend and we had this debate. So I think it's a really valuable thing to just take a pause, have a look at this slide and see if you can submit on the chat line what word you think this slide is representing. What word do we often use to describe behaviours? And this is a word that I think springs to mind in lots of cultures. So I'll just let you have a think about that for a minute. I'll just give you a little clue. So that's a little game of noughts and crosses. Some people may know it as tic-tac-toe, but in my area of the north, it's noughts and crosses. And then on the right-hand side of the slide, possibly your left, there's just a little golf tee, sort of just slightly dug into the grass there. I'm not a golfer, but I'm reliably told that's what it is.
We've had a few people coming in, Anne-Marie, and
Okay.
they're all saying, everyone is saying naughty.
Absolutely. And isn't that a kind of commonly used word? We, you know, so frequently hear that word. Well, he's just being naughty. And I had a friend this weekend who said to me, oh, come on, Anne-Marie, surely you accept that, you know, sometimes kids are just being naughty. Well, it probably won't come as a surprise to lots of people, but actually, no, I don't. But I'm also not a perfect parent. I'm not a perfect grandparent. I'm doing what most of you out there are doing, and I'm muddling through and doing the best I can. And sometimes I get it wrong. And the reasons I get it wrong is not because children that I'm encountering are being naughty. It's because I don't understand their behaviour. I don't understand where that behaviour is coming from. So let's go back to our little boy in the sea. If he won't come out of the sea when he's told, is he just being naughty? Or is he so absorbed in his sensory joy? Is he enchanted by the sea and the sun and not wanting that moment to stop? Does he know that actually he may get to go in the sea again? And if so, does he know for how long? Does he know when he could maybe have that experience again? If he'll ever get that experience again? So I think it's fair to say that when we're talking about exploring behaviour, it should be just that. It should be that we're exploring. And for us to explore as the adults, the carers, the parents, the loved ones, the teachers, it takes calmness and patience and observation and self-regulation on our part. And I think we often are the ones that struggle and fail with those elements that we expect our children to have grasped. And, you know, sometimes parents will say to me, he's 10 years old, surely he should know better. But actually, you know, I'm 50 plus years old, and I'm sure there's some of you out there 20 plus, 30 plus, maybe 70 plus. And yes, there are times when our behaviour is perhaps not what we would choose it to be. We all lose calmness, we all lose patience, we all lose the skills to take a step back and to calmly observe and to be self-regulated. But when we move off that by just going into a power battle, then that often comes from the belief or the kind of consolation for ourselves that the child is just being naughty. And that actually really, in essence, lacks a real understanding about the reactive and responsive behaviour that we are talking about. So the title of our webinars each week is this: Explore and Challenging. Because when we explore and take that word sort of through a dictionary explanation, then we're thinking about traveling through in order to learn about. And I think that's a great focus for considering behaviour. We're going to be inquiring into and discussing that detail. We want to know what's really going on, what's really that drive. Why is that child reluctant to do as they're told? or do as they're asked? What's holding them back from being able to respond quickly and as appropriately as we feel that they perhaps should be? So explore also means sort of to examine by really touching, I think by touching that kind of digging down deep, touching on the realities of what's actually going on, like excavating that behavior is where that sort of touch element comes in. So each time that we focus on our behavior topics, this is where we're coming from in terms of understanding explore and then understanding challenging. We're thinking about words like demanding. We're thinking about words like provocative, like testing. Those are the things that challenge us. When we can't really get to the root of what's going on, we can't dig down deep enough and understand what's going on. So we fall back into our behaviours of impatience, lack of calmness, inability to observe things as deeply and as well as we should. And we pass things off then as just being naughty. And so what we want to do is try and think, actually, even if we believe they're just being naughty, how is that? What is that looking like? And where is the demand in that, and how is it disruptive, and who is it disruptive to? So let's just pick up on demand, because that's often a twofold situation. Because sometimes as a carer, when we're insistent, then actually we are the ones that are being demanding, not our children. We're the ones that are putting that demand out there. And of course, for lots of our neurodiverse children, in particular, if our children have got a pathological demand avoidance diagnosis, that profile of autism, we won't get sucked in today on diagnostic terms and terminology. We could spend a whole week on all of those things. But what we will do is just think about the anxiety around a lot of these neurodiverse diagnoses and profiles that our children are often working with. I think that anxiety, and sometimes children are often described as demanding, but by that, do we mean that really and truly they're being sort of perhaps some flexibility issues, so they're not very flexible, or that actually they're overwhelmed with anxiety? I know recently I was working with a family, and their little girl, their description was that she was demanding the iPad all the time. All she wanted was her iPad, and she wouldn't, move off of that. And so after some detection work, we actually learned and appreciated that her choice-making skills are quite deficit. So what we needed to do was work on supporting her in making a choice. And for some families, that can be really challenging, because we can think, well, there's hundreds of choices around. There's a room full of toys, there's a cupboard full of games, there's a bookshelf full of books. But for many of our children, those things become part of the environment. That, we put a favourite picture up on our lounge wall, and how often do we actually stand and look at it? We kind of just get used to it being there, and we perhaps forget to admire it or look at it as much as we should. And I think sometimes toys around the room that are always there feel and look like that for many of our children. So perhaps they don't know, even though we feel they should, what really is available. So lacking that sort of just know knowledge about how we make a choice, how we choose things, that's how we can then unravel the whole idea of disruption. We usually use that to describe the child, but often it's not the child, it's that dysregulated sort of unpredicted behaviour, and sometimes the disruption is caused by our dysregulated or unpredictable behaviour. So we can create that problem, and it can manifest itself. And sometimes I think it roots from our panic, and we panic about the future. We panic about, well, what are our children? I've heard this phrase so many times. What will he or she end up like? Well, no one knows, but actually what we do know is that the more we can understand and support that comfortable behaviour, reduce anxiety, then the more likely it is that our children will end up like their very best selves. And that's all we can hope for in any aspect of parenting. I think sometimes we end up with that sort of behaviour that is reactive. Perhaps a response, we request our children to maybe get into the car, and our child perhaps perceives that as a demand, and the child is already anxious. Maybe their bucket's brimming. Maybe they don't want to get in the car. Maybe they hate car travel. Maybe they know they're going to school, and that's an issue at the moment. And so that results in them internalizing all those feelings, and their bucket's about ready to overflow. And so we can then experience that really kind of reactive behavior, perhaps, flailing arms around, knocking things over, whatever's in line gets flown, gets flung. And, it might be that previously you've supported that with dealing with sensory demands. Maybe you've given your child a good roll up in the duvet, but then latterly our child needed some space. So how do we get them from A to B without throwing everything around and smashing things over? So that moves us then into the kind of what we're doing now is really discussing the why that might be happening. So we could pin under there the word anxiety. We could pin under there unpredictable. We could pin under there the fact that our child is having some sensory issues because of that heightened anxiety. So we're really moving into all those so why are we experiencing that particular behavior? Fear of getting into the car, fear of going to school. And then, of course, that moves us into almost another consideration. So why are those fears around? And that moves us then to think, so how can we manage those fears? How can we consider what might be the best plan of action? And of course, it's very easy to think, well, we just won't get in the car, or we just can't make school today. And I know that is not always the ideal, and it's not always the best solution. Sometimes in a crisis, it's the solution that we end up with. And again, we could spend the whole day sort of thinking about that. And I want to just put at that point, because time's very limited today, so we don't have necessarily that time to go into the depth that we need to for each aspect of these behaviours that might be bubbling away. So please do feel free to reach out at any time. My email is on the slide there, and you're very welcome to reach out after this webinar at other times. I have ongoing services and support that I offer to families and to professionals. So let's think about how then. So prevention is always the best option. So we want to think about things that support our child's understanding. That first of all, you get that they don't want to get in the car, that you understand their fears around school, and that you are on side with them, that we're on the same page. Because if our child feels that they are kind of up against it with you, then that's when we're likely to see a lot of this very disruptive behaviour that we use that word to describe. So I think one of the things that we need to really think about is the incentive. So what incentive are we offering? And, you know, I'm kind of being very broad here with this example of the car, but as simple as what's in the car to remind our child that actually they've just to kind of get through this school day, if that's what our decision has been. And then as soon as they're in the car, they've got something to sort of come home with. And I'm just going to share the story of a tea bag. And I meant to bring with me a Yorkshire tea bag, but some of you may be familiar with this story before, but I think it's just a nice example and a nice reminder of the fact that sometimes the simplest of things can help to reduce that anxiety that often manifests as appearing demanding and disruptive. So I had a little girl who was really anxious about that whole transition, which is not unusual for our children and certainly something worth you looking at. Is it the transition that's part of the problem? And her concerns about getting into school and getting home again were actually all melted away very easily by her taking a tea bag in her pocket. And she took a tea bag in her pocket so that she knew when she was coming home from school that she was going to have a cup of tea with her mummy when she got in, and that was her very favourite thing to do. And I kind of still get a lump in my throat when I think about it, because believe me, we did not reach that conclusion very easily. And I can't tell you how delighted we all were when we discovered that actually that was something that really reduced her anxiety. And believe me, she was a little girl very capable of demonstrating some very heavy, demanding and disruptive behaviours, or so we described them as, or her parents described them as, when we were in the throes of exploring what was really going on sort of underneath that waterline. And Gary Mezibov, who's a real guru in the world of autism, really kind of talked about that importance of diving under that waterline. And I'm sure if any of you have done any parenting programs or anywhere where we're thinking about offering appropriate support, our first starting point is to always think what's happening and why might that be happening before we consider how we're going to change, support and reduce the anxiety, so that we see that reduction in demanding and disruptive behaviour. Often families tell me that their child has a real desire for control. And I think sometimes it's important that we don't label that as a control in the true sense, because it's not control insofar as wanting to be in charge. It's a desire for feeling better, for feeling calmer. And as you all know, very often we all feel calmer when we're in a moment of being in charge. I know people, even as adults, who are much more comfortable planning the itinerary if you're having a holiday or a day away, or even making the bookings, because that way they know the job's being done and the job's being done properly. And you know, sometimes that's a real benefit, a really helpful personality trait. So I think it's important we just hold on to the fact that that control is absolutely not referring to you know, being bossy or a desire to be in charge. So as with all experiences, I think it's really important that we understand as fully as we possibly can, which is what I'm saying really, that the individual child's profile is what we're really looking at, that we can only really then begin to properly identify triggers. And obviously we don't have time here to cover in, you know, massive detail, but please do contact me if you would like a more sort of detailed explanation of all those contributory aspects of and the key areas of autism and neurodiversity and ADHD, and that whole arena that we're really sort of bring into our hearts and minds at the moment. And that comes under the umbrella of communication, of social interaction, that social understanding, the stages and styles of memory, whether that's kind of the autobiographical memory, so those kind of owned memories, whether it's your sensory system, whether it's to do with your ability of seeing the bigger picture, that central coherence, whether it's to do with theory of mind, that sort of seeing things from other people's perspective and understanding other people's experiences, whether it's perhaps wrapped up in executive functioning, thinking about that difficulties in perhaps planning things, perhaps difficulties in starting and finishing, or abilities in these areas, maybe about impulse control and many other aspects. So please do, if you are kind of at a stumbling block as to those whys under that iceberg, please do get in touch. And sometimes when we are familiar with all of those contributory factors, we have what we can describe as a light bulb moment. And I think those light bulb moments are sometimes those things that are a turning point for us. And certainly, you know, some fabulous and really much more learned people than me, like Simon Baron-Cohen and Uta Frith and Frankie Happy, to name but a few, have spent lots of time sort of examining that interplay and relevance between those psychological and developmental areas. And that then leads us to really appreciate that actually we're truly here thinking about stage, not age. And we need to be considered in our light bulb moments that actually, oh yeah, that might be what's going on. And I think a really good starting point is to be sure that we include in our thinking about whys the fact that we are confident that our children know what they are good at and they know what they can do, that we are really working on fostering self-belief, that we are thinking about the whole arena that I just mentioned of neurodiversity, that we're understanding that sometimes what appears to be demanding, what appears to be disruptive, is actually rooted in that desire for sameness. Are our children seeing actually if, you know, their caregivers all respond to them in the same way when a particular situation arises? Are we being mindful of the fact that this is about stage of development, not chronological age? That actually our children don't have that necessarily that just know knowledge, that we understand that their narrative, their perspective, their interpretation of a situation may be different to that of their peers, that of their siblings, and that we know their tolerance balance, that we know that we notice all of these individual perspectives, and that we notice that is this behaviour actually rooted in perhaps asking for help, or is it that we've pushed them beyond that tolerance balance, and that we're not really rooting our support and management of them around what they are capable of and what they do truly understand. I recently chatted with a parent who shared with me her 11-year-old daughter still plays at princesses. And it's okay, mum feels, when she's with a 6-year-old cousin, but she feels it's getting a bit awkward when she's not. So we're kind of going back to that expectations and opinions. And I had some sort of recently myself turning up to a home visit on my e-bike, dressed in my cycle gear. And it's interesting because people perceive that as a little eccentric. And yet, if I turned up on a motorbike, I think people might perceive me as fairly cool. I'd quite like to be able to do that. So sometimes what we're talking about here is just understanding the narrative. We're talking about how can we help change our thinking around behaviour? Is it demanding and provocative testing, or is it more to do with anxiety around other people's perceptions? I delivered some training recently in an adult care centre, and it was interesting because someone asked me a kind of similar scenario to, is it okay or is it not? When is it okay? When is it not to play at being a princess? And they asked me, is it wrong to take a Superman cape off a 28-year-old client when we're going shopping? So we could, of course, have a whole day's debate on this and many other aspects. And many will be adamant that it is okay and he's got a right and all of those perspectives, and many may not. And my personal thoughts go back to the start of our discussion today. We need to be scaffolding our knowledge and our understanding of that whole person, of that social situation and the context in which we are thinking. So if the person concerned is able to make a choice, then what would that choice likely be for them? Are they the kind of person that actually quite enjoys the attention, that wants that, craves that social interaction, that loves that social interaction, which many of us and many of our children do? Or are they the kind of person that actually wouldn't want that, that would rather be not noticed? I know a little boy that wouldn't wear pictures on his t-shirts because he connected and realized that often if he did, people would comment. And so he would choose a very plain t-shirt in the hopes of averting attention away. So perhaps it's about us taking responsibility and offering an alternative at this point in time. Is there a good time to do something? Should we be teaching when that good time is? And again, there are lots of renowned sort of theorists and behaviorists like Bruner and Vygotsky who, discussed scaffolding in terms of accessing learning and achieving independence. And all of these things do contribute to behavior. But in terms of exploring why we should do things, when we should do things, and how we should do things, I think we really do need to have that understanding of a given situation. And so, in essence, what we're talking about is a good starting point for considering how we can reframe that disruptive and demanding behaviour into changing the narrative, into understanding that actually demand and disruption is more about desire and distress. And I think if we think in terms of that desire and distress, and we think that once we have all that information on board, then we can begin to think, right, how can we shape and preempt and prevent? And I've shared some examples with you today. But again, if you do get stuck on thinking in this way, thinking in these terms, thinking of those whys and then those hows around behaviours that you are experiencing, then please don't hesitate to reach out. As I've said, I'm not a behaviourist or a psychologist, but I am pleased to say that I have had lots of success in supporting changes in behaviour, possibly rooted in some of my own neurodiverse creative thinking, and also knowing that it's much deeper and more personal than printouts and downloads. And that alone can often be a vehicle to a successful place. It's often the most personalized approaches that have the most impact. And I'd just like to leave us thinking about the fact that Luke Bearden, who talks about that golden equation of autism plus the environment equals behaviour. And I think all of the examples that we've talked about today are certainly influenced by that journey of understanding and personalising and looking at the environment. And when we talk about the environment, we're not just talking about the physical environment, we're talking about the social and emotional environments as well. Because then that's when on those journeys we hopefully experience those light bulb moments by really understanding the things that our children are good at and rooting some of our support and management in that direction. So, they may have a really good visual memory, so giving them something tangible. The little girl who used that tea bag as her kind of memory, she needed something very concrete. She needed physical memories. Words of, I've told and said didn't have any resonate at all with her. She needed that more real means of forming and fusing and using her memory. So going through each of those concerns and behaviours in finite detail sounds onerous and sounds like it's going to take so much time that it becomes an impossibility. But I think if we aim to support behaviour so that we can help this reframing of demand and disruption into desire and distress, then we are more likely, if we understand the desire and we understand the distress, to achieve a comfortable behaviour. So working on that narrative of preempting and preventing. And that's definitely what happened here. This little boy is just sampling very nicely. He was one of those little people who, liked a burrito to calm his sensory system, a burrito being, rolling our children up in a duvet, and by all means seeking out some support with occupational therapy and behavioural specialists is always a good thing to do if that's something where you feel you're getting stuck on some sensory or indeed behaviour issues. Don't shy away from seeking support, although I obviously appreciate that sometimes waiting lists and things are difficult in those areas, so please do reach out. I don't have a waiting list, thankfully. So I think as well, to just finish off explaining that this little boy's rap offered him a bit of independence in managing those times when his anxiety bucket was overflowing and he was subject to, flinging and flailing things. If you've got something wrapped around yourself, then actually it helps you to reframe your own mind from flinging and flailing things and helps you with a more calm exit to some space that you might need, which reduces the opportunity for any disruption and calms his distress and calms his desire. So his desire for space was definitely there, but his journey to get out into that space was sometimes very disruptive by his flailing and throwing things around. So just having that focus of putting that lovely elasticated scarf around himself and giving himself a squeeze helped him with his getting to where he was desiring his outside space, and also calmed his distressed state. So that's kind of how I'm talking when I'm saying reframing and rethinking. And I hope that there's a few helpful pointers here on this slide for you, and that you have hopefully today felt that we've explored the what, whys and hows and preventing and preempting some aspects of behaviour so that we can support that behaviour into being more comfortable behaviour. And I'm very happy to take any questions and hopefully offer a few pointers or answers. But if not, then please do think about linking in or connecting directly with me, or certainly linking in to our next topic, which is going to be framed around what's been described as shutdowns and meltdowns. So I look forward to meeting you then if you do need to pop off now.
Thanks, Anne-Marie. That was really brilliant. There's some really useful advice and strategies in that. We've had plenty of questions coming through, so we'll just try and get through as many as possible.
That's absolutely great.
The first one is, my child will lash out for what appears to be no particular reason. At the same time, she appears to find it funny. We try walking away as it's not possible to connect with her. She'll then grab clothes and continue hitting us. How do we best manage this, or to connect when she is doing this?
I think less is more very often with our children, and so sometimes trying to connect at the time when that bucket of anxiety is completely overflowing is not going to really help matters. And I think sometimes in that situation, having a scarf or something available for the child to sort of wrap around themselves, and for you to suggest that, but no more, you know, pop this round, you'll feel better. I'm not suggesting at all, please don't misinterpret me, that we take our children and, you know, wrap them up when they're in a point of distress. But sometimes offering that sort of something to reduce sensory, making sure that you know that if that's a likely behaviour, a likely reaction, that you've got an okay box of things to throw, lots of beanbag, lots of softballs, you know, rolled up socks, you know, open the sock drawer and direct to throwing those, so that you're redirecting some of those explosive behaviours. And of course, the best possible thing is to try and think about prevention. So trying to work out what is that trigger, because it always appears that our children are just, but they're not just lashing out. There is a trigger, there is a root to that. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate and how, you know, frustrated and confused I've been too in trying to find that trigger. And I think sometimes we are in the danger of putting either a parental and adult a neurotypical interpretation on our children's emotional behaviours at that time. And she may be appearing to laugh. It may be she's laughing instead of crying. And it may be that she appears that she's finding things funny. But I think, you know, the likelihood is that she doesn't like being in that state of distress, that dysregulated state. But if you feel that she does like that adrenaline rush, she likes that thrill of that, then it's thinking about how we can regulate that experience in different ways. So giving her lots of movement opportunities, lots of other opportunities to really get that system sort of jumping about and working up, lots of throwing activities and lots of you know, positive hard feedback. So, you know, can she jump on the ground? Is the thing she can, you know, beat a tune on? Has she got a nice hard cushion or a blow up ball? You know, those sorts of things that give her lots of opportunities to really have some of those expressive hard sensory behaviours. I hope that helps. I'm kind of just throwing that out there off the top of my head, but you know, there might be something in there that you can start to just unravel. Often it feels like, you know, a big plate of spaghetti and we're just taking one strand at a time to try and have some understanding on what's really going on.
That was brilliant. Thank you, Anne-Marie. The next one is, as a neurodiverse parent who struggles with emotional regulation, how do you regulate your own emotions at the same time as when your child is also experiencing dysregulation?
Oh, it's a tough one, isn't it? And I'm there too. And I have family members who are there too. So you've got my absolute empathy. I think sometimes employing the strategies that we've been talking about today. So knowing the sorts of things that help you to regulate, being very disciplined in being unresponsive rather than over responsive. So always trying to do that step back rather than step forward. I think our impulsiveness, our need to have a quick response, a knee-jerk reaction, is one of the most difficult things for us to get to grips with ourselves. And I think it's just about really learning what works for you, what helps you to put the brakes on. And it might be that you too need some reminders. And I would have buzzwords on sticky notes on your fridge that help you to take that step back. So things like, you know, instead of naughty, the word explore, preempt, you know, that kind of, we've just talked then about changing from, you know, disruptive and demanding to desire and distress. So having those words, desire, distress, so those reminders in front of us, so that hopefully we're a bit kind of halted in our moving forwards with impulse, and employing some of the strategies, you know, having something in our pocket to sort of remind us as well that actually we need to take a step back, not a step forward. It's always better to do less than to do too much in the heat of the moment.
That's brilliant, thank you. The next one is, my daughter has ADHD and can easily get bored and agitated, particularly on long road trips. How do you suggest I keep her calm whilst in the car for a long time?
I think lots of brain and also physical activities can be really helpful. So, you know, maybe molding and being very active with particular activities, like maybe taking things in the car that you wouldn't perhaps ordinarily immediately think about taking in the car. So maybe like, you know, a little bat with a ball attached to it. If you can stand the noise of that when you're driving. Sometimes the noise of kids' activities are better for us to deal with than the noise of boredom and those difficult behaviours. Putting something under her feet in the car, letting her sit on a moving cushion for a time before you travel, and maybe something in her back, but of course making sure that you know, they're all compliable to the seat belt, but absolutely having something to pummel under her feet that's got a nice response. I know I've had success with not very blown up balloons or partly deflated balls to stamp around on in the car, and also something to squeeze, something very physical, like you know, the exercise bands can be really good, sort of around your arms rather than in your hand. And obviously lots of those, you know, can we see what we're looking for, sort of non-demanding games that are interactive but mean, you know, we're doing a little bit of looking out. And there's lots of things on the market, isn't there, you know, whiteboards and all those sorts of things. So I think also choice, a little basket or bag of activities, so that we easy activities that just are not necessarily brain demanding, but just occupying our hands and maybe occupying our mind a little bit too. I think sometimes teaching our children what we can do in the car is a really useful exercise. And I think it's the same as teaching them, you know, what you can do at night time if everybody else is asleep. So having particular things that you only say and you only use in the car. So there's an element of newness about them, and, you know, rotating those things, not having them readily available all of the time, so they feel new and unusual.
Brilliant, thank you. The next one is, our little boy is nearly 6 and is being assessed for autism. He does well at school, but we see disruptive behaviour and meltdowns afterwards. He finds playing on his iPad very calming, so he has some iPad time before and after school. However, then he struggles in the evenings when it comes to put the iPad away and get in the bath and bed, etc. He can sometimes end up hitting, biting, pulling my hair when he when we get to this time in the evening. Do you have any ideas on how we can support him with these transitions?
I think you're absolutely right. I think it is about transitions, and sometimes teaching our children a kind of start and stop point can be really hard, especially if the children that respond really negatively to regular use of timers. It might be worth creating some kind of visual schedule so that he can actually physically move that and take that off in some way. So post it in an envelope at the bottom or using a flap down. I don't know if those are the kinds of things that you're already working with or you've considered, but they can be really helpful in helping our children to move along with things and giving an element of choice in there. So do you want to come off your iPad now or in 2 minutes time? And sometimes just slipping in those choices can take a lot of the anxiety of transitioning from one activity to another. So giving a really visual and calm and planned rundown towards that transition rather than iPad's finished, now it's time to. It mightn't be that we need a more gentle approach to that start, to that finish and start of the next activity. So thinking about how you can do that using some visual clues and also putting in some minor choices that make him feel calmer and a little bit more in control. And also working with school, because if you feel the behaviours are escalating and he's starting off from an anxious point because of time at school, then that is really important that you're all working together and you're understanding that actually, this isn't to do with fault, this is to do with everybody needing to appreciate that the build-up of anxiety. And is there some activities that he could do at the end of the school day before he leaves so that he's actually coming home in a less dysregulated state?
Brilliant. We've probably got time for a couple more. I know my child does not want to go to school, and this is a big trigger for her because she has no friends, but I can't make it better for her. If you can't remove the trigger that causes the disruptive behaviour, what can you do?
I think sometimes our children perceive friendships in a different way to other children. They perhaps have their own idea of what a friend looks like, and it isn't uncommon for typically developing children to comment they haven't got any friends. So I would start by exploring the trigger further and working on a really nice broad understanding of friendships, having a look at some social stories, but using Carol Gray's website, and I'm actually social story trained too, so being very sure and very clear that that is actually a social story around friendships that you are using and not a misguided social story perspective. So have a look at Carol Gray's website and explore how we can really explain what friendships look like. And I imagine that if friendships is probably not the only trigger, so thinking about transitions of how we can support improving her idea and thoughts around going to school, what's going on there. I would want to really kind of dig away at this a little bit more, because you're right, we can't always remove the trigger, but we can understand it a little bit more in a little bit more detail, and then we can work with the detail. So I think sometimes really exploring what it is our child thinks, what's their perspective. Sometimes there's more to dig at, more excavating to do.
That's great. Thanks, Anne-Marie. The next one is, one of the things I find the most challenging is when I feel that there is a time constraint put on me. If my child is having an explosive or implosive presentation, I can find it hard to stay calm and be patient when I have somewhere to be on time. What can I do in this moment?
Absolutely. And isn't it always the way? Isn't it always? at the point when you just need to get out, you've got an appointment, you've got to get in the car, and it's taking 22 attempts to get your shoes on. And I think those kinds of situations, because we know that they are likely to be explosive points in the day, they are the times when we really need to think, right, how can we put into place, when everything's calm, a sensory and a kind of social plan that's visual, that's appropriate, and that's right for our child. So that then when it comes to those real kind of head-on moments, that we've already got a system in place so we can slip into that straight away. So rather than waiting to deal with it when it is a charged, emotionally charged moment, and we kind of almost feel like our children sense that we need to get out. And so that sense of urgency is sort of what tips everyone over the edge. So if we can do all we can, I know it's not always possible, but if we can do as much as we can to remove that emotional energy, that sense of urgency out of the situation, and really think about what can we put in place before then. And so we're doing like a kind of countdown to getting out of the house, rather than that, like, right, come on, it's time to go, we need to get our shoes on. That actually our shoes are on 10 minutes before we leave, because, and so we're well ready. And having something kind of good to work towards at the end of that countdown can be really helpful. So even having a treat in the car ready to get in there for. And that treat, doesn't have to be food, it doesn't have to be toys, it can just be a kind of token for when you come home, you get an extra minute on your iPad or whatever. So, thinking about incentivizing those moments rather than dealing with the emotional charged moments that they often do evoke.
Brilliant. That is all we've got time for today. So thank you, Anne-Marie. That was a great webinar.